The descent wasn't smooth. The vessel's frame scraped across something unseen before the warning klaxon suddenly died. Then came silence. A heavy, unnatural silence. Mark Breener's knuckles tightened around the railing, bracing for another impact, but nothing followed. Beyond the viewport, the sky wasn't scattered with stars. Instead, it was choked with forms. Immense metallic silhouettes. Mark, Dalton's voice drifted from the pilot's seat, uneasy and low. We're not in Kansas anymore. No kidding. Dead ahead loomed a structure dwarfing any Earth-built city, bristling with spires, docks, and what looked disturbingly like artillery arrays. Smaller ships buzzed around it, restless, like a swarm of wasps. Whatever this was, it wasn't human. Mark leaned in over Dalton's shoulder. Any read on what we're looking at? Mark asked. Dalton shook his head. Sensors are spitting junk. Nothing in the archives even close. Before Mark could press further, the comms panel lit up. First came a sound low, resonant, like a lion's roar dragged through static. Then words, jagged and alien, snapped through the channel. Dalton's brow furrowed. Translator's choking, but I think. They just told us to hold position and prepare for boarding. Mark gave a dry laugh. Of course they did. A shadow passed across the viewport as a long, clawed docking arm reached out, scraping the hull before locking in. The shriek it made set every nerve on edge. Seconds later, the airlock cycled, and the smell arrived first. Metallic, sharp, with a chemical undertone. Then the figures stepped through. Not uniform, some roughly human-sized, others towering like cranes. All wore segmented armor that hissed as its systems shifted. Insect-like visors glared at them, and weapons humming with lethal charge aimed steady. One giant, clad in darker armor than the rest, advanced. Its voice rumbled like grinding stone, but this time the translator caught the meaning. By decree of the Imperial Dominion, you are detained for trespassing sovereign ground. You will be taken to the Emperor's court for judgment. Dalton's jaw set hard, but Mark only smiled the cold kind earned from bad mornings. Fine, he said evenly. Lead on. The aliens expected fear. He saw it in the way their weapons stayed raised, the way their eyes followed every twitch of muscle. But fear wasn't coming. 12 years a Marine, 2 brush wars, and the scars of orbital strikes. This was nothing but pageantry. Their escort marched them through a docking bridge into the behemoth. Not a station, Mark realized a fortress. Its walls etched with centuries of symbols, floors gleaming like glass but laced with veins of alloy. Every corridor lined with more guards, their eyes fixed like handlers watching wild dogs. The court was worse. A cavernous hall so vast it felt open air. Colomassive pillars carved into the visages of long-dead sovereigns rose above them. At the chamber's far end, a throne of black stone perched high above the floor, and upon it sat a figure draped in layered armor and flowing crimson cloth. The helm lay aside, revealing a face half flesh, half metal, eyes like molten gold. This had to be the Emperor. He didn't speak at once, only scanned them as if appraising livestock. The silence stretched, taut as a drawn wire, until his voice finally rolled through the hall. You enter my empire uninvited, bearing no sigil of fealty. Speak before I sentence you. Dalton shifted. Uneasy, but Mark stepped forward and met that molten stare without wavering. We didn't come by invitation, Mark said. A busted jump drive dropped us here. As for fate, his gaze swept the chamber, lingering over guards, weapons, and ceremonial finery. I've seen worse. A ripple moved through the assembly. The Emperor's metal fingers tapped once on the throne's arm. From the shadows above, Mark felt the pressure of 100 alien eyes. They didn't know it yet, but the rules had changed. Mark held still after his words. No smirk, no blink. No hint of doubt for the Emperor to exploit. He'd learned early that in a den of predators the first twitch marked the prey. The murmur faded like air leaving a room. Rows of guards tightened their grips, more from habit than decision. The Emperor's gaze remained lazy, as if appraising a nuisance he hadn't yet decided to crush. "You've seen worse," he repeated, disbelief lacing the tone. It was not a question, it was a challenge. Mark's voice stayed even. "Where I'm from, we bury thousands before breakfast, and we don't much bother with thrones." Dalton flinched beside him, not from alien menace, but from the dangerous ease of Mark's answer. The Emperor's golden eyes narrowed. His metal hand closed on the armrest with a sound like a blade being sheathed. "You speak as if the Dominion is beneath you," he said. "I speak as if your threats hold no weight," Mark shot back. A wave of hostility pulsed through the guards. Weapons shifted forward together. Power cores hummed like an oncoming storm. The Emperor raised his flesh hand, and the hall fell hush. "Intriguing," he said. "You are either foolish or forged of something few species endure." He leaned in. "I will know which before I decide how many pieces to scatter you into." With a sharp gesture, two imposing guards stepped forward, bigger than the insect-eyed troops in the dock. Armor gleaming like oil, wielding strange twin blades that thrummed in their grips. "Bring them to the gauntlet," the Emperor commanded. Dalton frowned. "The hell's the gauntlet?" Mark muttered, which was the last thing he said before the guards flanked them and shoved them toward a side passage. The corridors beyond narrowed and darkened. The walls here were bare, stripped of the ceremonial carvings in the main hall. These weren't for show. They were the corridors turned functional, like the exposed guts of a warship. Now and then, Mark noticed mechanical panels exhaling thin bursts of vapor, leaving the faint tang of metal in the air. Dalton's expression said he was already weighing odds. "Think this is a test?" "Probably," Mark replied. "Question is, the kind you can win or the kind made for examples?" They descended stairs carved into the inner plating itself, spilling into a chamber vast and hot, the air heavy and thrumming with machinery beneath the floor. At its center yawned a circular pit 50 meters wide. The walls curled inward, tiered with rows of alien onlookers. Some wore robes, others armor, but their faces shared the same expression. "Anticipation," Dalton muttered. "Feels like a coliseum." "Because it is," Mark answered. A voice thundered across the chamber, echoing through hidden speakers. "By decree of the Emperor, the humans will prove their worth in the gauntlet. Survive and speak again. Fail and feed the vermin." A low vibrating hum filled the chamber. Alien applause. Two gates split open at opposite ends. From one, Mark and Dalton were shoved into the pit, the floor under their boots coated in fine ash-like dust. From the other, something entered. It loomed 3 meters tall, its bulk plated in chitinous armor, yet disturbingly quick. Forelimbs tipped with hooked claws that glistened wet. Its face was all mandibles and lidless black eyes. Dalton swore. "We didn't bring weapons." Mark scanned the floor. "We've got the ground." Dalton blinked. "The hell does that mean?" the alien charged. Mark yanked Dalton clear as the claws tore through the floor, spraying grit and shards. Rolling, Mark's hand closed on a loose plate fragment. It wasn't much, but it would do. Rising to one knee, he hurled it not at the chest, but the eye. It clanged off armor, but the distraction gave him a heartbeat. "Split!" he barked. They darted apart, forcing the beast to pivot between them. Dalton found a length of pipe, swung like a bat. The claws sliced it in half. Mark didn't hesitate. He hammered a boot into one spindly leg joint. It buckled with a wet pop, the creature shrieking like boiling metal. It spun on him, but he was already backing off, low and ready. Dalton caught on. Feint left, lunge right, stabbing the jagged pipe into a gap at the creature's neck. It wasn't deep, but it staggered. Mark followed with another kick to the wounded leg. This time the joint collapsed, the creature slamming to the ground. The crowd's hum swelled. Mark seized the broken pipe and drove it through the throat. Dark fluid sprayed, the beast choking before falling still. The hum rose into frenzy. A gate opened again. Dalton wiped blood from his sleeve. "Please tell me that's it." Mark shook his head. "They don't call it a gauntlet for one fight." Two more slipped out smaller, faster, moving on four limbs like armored hounds. Their mouths dripped fluid that hissed against the floor. "Stay moving," Mark said. "If they circle, we're finished." They split instantly. Dalton dodged, the beast pivoting snake fast and grazing his arm, saliva burning through fabric. Mark's attacker came head-on. He caught its plating, used its own momentum to smash it into the wall. Stunned but not broken. Dalton scrambled, keeping distance by inches. Mark made his choice. A brutal knee into the skull dazed the creature long enough for him to wrench off a limb in a sizzling spray. It screamed. He rammed the severed limb down its throat until it convulsed and dropped. Dalton's opponent faltered at the sound. Mark charged, wielding the severed limb like a club, smashing the second beast aside. Dalton seized its neck and snapped it clean. They stood panting, staring at twitching bodies. The crowd's hum shook the air. Above, the Emperor rose from his throne. "I see," his voice rolled. "You are not prey." Mark looked up from the pit. "Told you." The Emperor tilted his head. "And yet, you bleed." Mark glanced at the shallow cut on his arm, blood already drying, then back up. "Yeah," he said. "So do you." The Emperor didn't react immediately. Then, after a long pause, he raised his metal hand and snapped his. "The trial of shadows is no spectacle. Lord Veal, it is death for most who enter. All the better to see what they truly are," Vale replied smoothly. "If they survive, perhaps they are worthy. If not, the Dominion wastes no further breath on them." Mark's jaw tightened. He knew the type. Different face, different world, but the same smug tone he'd heard from politicians and officers who loved watching others fail. "Fine," Mark said before Dalton could speak. "We'll do your trial." Dalton turned his head sharply. Mark's voice was flat. "We already proved we can survive things that want to kill us face to face. Now they want to see if we can do it when it's uglier. We can." The Emperor regarded him for a moment, then inclined his head slightly. "So be it. The trial begins at the next dark cycle. Until then, you will be housed in the guest barracks." His gaze hardened. "Do not mistake this for mercy." The guest barracks were nothing more than a converted storage deck, with a pair of narrow bunks bolted to the floor and a single wall vent that exhaled warm metallic-smelling air. The door wasn't locked, at least not physically, but Mark could feel the hum of a containment field in the frame. Dalton dropped onto one of the bunks. You could have at least asked what the trial of shadows is before you agreed." Mark sat on the opposite bunk, elbows on his knees. "Didn't matter. If I said no, they'd kill us anyway. At least this way we pick the terms." Dalton shook his head. "Picking the terms doesn't mean walking into a death trap with a smile." Mark didn't answer. His mind was already turning the possibilities over. Trials, gauntlets, arenas. Every culture had its way of proving dominance. The difference here was that the Emperor seemed just as curious about them as the court was hostile. That curiosity might keep them alive if they could play it right. Hours passed. The light in the ceiling dimmed to a dull glow, signaling the shift into the station's night cycle. The hum in the doorframe cut out and the panel slid open. Two guards entered. Not the insecty soldiers from before, but tall, broad-shouldered beings with armor that seemed fused directly to their skin. They didn't speak, only motioned for Mark and Dalton to follow. The trial's location wasn't in the fortress's ceremonial halls, nor in the arena pits. The guards led them down service corridors, past unmarked bulkheads into the kind of maintenance shafts that smelled of oil and hot metal. Eventually, they came to a massive circular hatch. One guard pressed his palm against a panel, and the hatch rolled open with a hiss. Beyond it was darkness, so complete it seemed to swallow the light spilling in from the corridor. The other guard handed each of them a short curved blade with a serrated back edge. The hilt was wrapped in a material that felt like scaled leather. "No other tools," the guard said in a voice like grinding stone. "No light, no map. Survive until the second cycle, and the trial is complete." Dalton raised an eyebrow. "Survive what?" The guard only bared teeth that looked like shards of obsidian. "You will know soon enough." Mark tested the weight of the blade in his hand. Balanced, deadly enough for close work, useless for anything at range, which meant whatever they'd be facing would be close. He stepped through the hatch without another word. Dalton followed, and the door sealed behind them, cutting off the last hint of light. The darkness was absolute. Not the kind you got in a city blackout. Not the kind where your eyes eventually adjusted. This was deep cave black, thick and smothering. Mark kept his breathing slow, listening. Somewhere far off there was movement. "Sounds like," Dalton whispered, then stopped as another sound cut him off. A slow, wet, dragging noise followed by a faint clicking, like claws tapping against metal. Mark's instincts screamed. He motioned for Dalton to move, and they began edging along what felt like a wall, one hand trailing against it to keep direction. The clicking grew louder. Something brushed against Mark's boot, light, quick. Too small to be one of the arena beasts, but it moved with the confidence of something that wasn't afraid. Dalton hissed. "Something's behind us." Mark didn't turn immediately. He waited until the sound was close. Close enough that he could hear the faint rasp of breath. Then he spun, dropping low, and drove the blade upward in a sharp, practiced motion. The steel met something hard, skidding off before biting into softer tissue. There was a screech, high and furious, and the sound of claws raking across Thefler. Dalton lunged in beside him, his blade flashing once in the dark. Something heavy thudded against the wall, then slid to the floor. The smell hit next. Accurate, almost burning. "One down," Mark said quietly. They didn't have long to breathe. From somewhere deeper in the dark came more clicks. This time in multiples, Dalton swallowed. "They're hunting in packs." The next hour was nothing but movement and noise. They never saw their attackers clearly, only shapes in the dark, claws scraping against steel, the flash of teeth and the briefest glints of some alien bioluminescence. Mark fought without hesitation. His strikes aimed for joints, soft spots, and gaps in armor. Dalton kept pace, grunting with effort each time he connected. The blades grew slick, the floor more treacherous. They lost track of how many they killed. At one point, they found a narrow alcove, a maintenance recess just big enough for them to crouch in. They took it, catching their breath. Dalton leaned back against the wall. "This is insane. They dump us in here with things we can't see. No idea where to go." "That's the point," Mark said. "This isn't about killing the creatures. It's about watching us survive the kind of fight that wears you down until you make a mistake." Dalton's voice was tight. "And when we make that mistake," Mark's grip tightened on his blade. "We don't." They moved again, following a faint current of air. Mark's best guess at finding another exit, or at least a defensible spot. The clicking noises had thinned. But the silence was worse. Then came the whisper. It wasn't in English. The words were liquid and sharp, carrying from somewhere ahead. Another voice answered. "Closer this time." Dalton tensed. "That's not one-off creatures." "No," Mark said, his tone low. "That's someone using the trial as cover." They moved slower now, blades ready. The voices drew closer until two figures stepped into the faintest glow spilling from a crack in the wall. Plating, they weren't guards. They weren't arena beasts. They were humanoid, slender, wrapped in dark fabric that broke up their outline, masks covering their faces. The weapons in their hands weren't blades. They were short-barreled firearms. Dalton's eyes widened. Assassins, Mark didn't waste breath. He dove forward before the first shot could line up, his blade punching up under the first assassin's arm and into the ribs. The figure convulsed and went down without a sound. Dalton lunged for the second, grabbing the weapon arm and wrenching it sideways as the shot went off. The muzzle flash was blinding in the dark, and the sound made Mark's ears ring. Dalton drove his knee into the assassin's gut, then slammed his blade down the side of the masked head. Both bodies hit the floor. Mark crouched, pulling the firearm from the dead assassin's grip. It was light, alien in design, but the trigger and grip were intuitive enough. They weren't here for the trial. Dalton said they were here for us. Vile, Mark said. He's not waiting for the trial to finish. They kept moving after that faster now. Whatever the trial was supposed to be, it had turned into an ambush. And that meant every minute they stayed in the dark was another chance for someone to finish what Veal had started. Hours blurred together. The glow from the crack in the wall was the only real light they saw until the faintest shift in the air told Mark they were near a larger opening. They emerged into a vast chamber, dimly lit by strips of pale-light embedded in the ceiling. At the far end was another hatch, thickened that meant an exit. Between them and it were three more of the pack creatures, crouched low, their eyes reflecting the light. Behind them, watching from a raised platform, stood Lord Vile himself. Mark smiled coldly. Guess we made it to the finals. The three creatures crouched in the dim light, their bodies low and tense, tails twitching like coiled whips. The metal floor beneath them bore deep claw gouges, signs they'd fought and fed here before. Their mouths hung open slightly, clear saliva dripping and hissing where I touched the steel. Mark didn't look at them first. He looked at Vile. The noble stood on the raised platform with the posture of someone, convinced nothing in the room could touch him. His silver eyes were like polished coins, cold and reflective. Two armored figures flanked him, guards in the same fused armor Mark had seen before, but heavier, almost plated like walking tanks. Dalton muttered without taking his eyes off the beasts. Pretty sure the rules don't say the trial ends with the guy who ordered it watching. Grip tightened on the alien firearm he'd taken from the assassins. Yeah, that's because this isn't the trial anymore. It's an execution with an audience of one. Foyle's voice carried down into the chamber, smooth as oil. You've done well to make it this far, human. But skill in the dark does not make you invincible. This ends now, before the Emperor makes the mistake of thinking you are more than you are. Dalton called back. That confidence in your pets is real cute. Let's see if they're better than the ones we've already killed. Vile's smile didn't waver. He gave a flick of his fingers and the creatures launched forward. Mark raised the firearm and squeezed the trigger. Thuipun spat a burst of blue-white energy, the recoil sharper than expected. The lead beast veered at Thella's second, the shot scorching a line across its flank, but not slowing. He warm up. He gestured, and his two guards stepped down from the platform. Up close, they were even bigger than they'd looked, each easily 8 feet tall with armor that and flexed as if part of their skin. Their hands ended not in fingers but in hooked metal claws. Dalton muttered, "Of course they're not just watching." Mark tossed him the alien firearm. "Make it count." The guards came fast for their size, moving with the smooth precision of trained killers. Mark met the first head-on, their blades clashing in a screech of metal. The guard's strength was monstrous, shoving Mark back a full step. Dalton opened fire on second, the blue-white bursts, punching holes in the armor, but not dropping it. The thing kept coming, swiping at Dalton's head with a clawed backhand. Dalton ducked, rolled, and fired again into the exposed joint at the armpit. This time, the guards snarled and staggered. Mark ducked under a sweeping hook from his opponent, slashing for the knee. Sparks flew as the serrated edge bit into the armor plating, not deep enough but enough to make the guards snarl. The counterstrike came fast, a knee to Mark's gut that knocked the wind out of him. He stumbled but didn't fall, twisting with the momentum to bring his blade across the guard's throat. The metal screeched in protest, finally giving way. A gush of dark fluid sprayed, and the guard collapsed, twitching. Dalton had driven his opponent back against the wall now, firing into the same damaged joint again and again until the armor split. The last shot took the guard's head halfway off, and it slumped to the floor. Vel's expression was different now. Not fear exactly, but the first hint of realizing his plan wasn't as neat as he thought. Mark took a step toward the platform. You sent assassins into the trial. You sent your pets. You sent your guards. You're still breathing because I'm letting you. Vel's voice was cold. You won't touch me. The moment you do, every guard in the court will cut you down. Mark's mouth twitched in something closer to a smile. Then maybe you should hope I keep letting you talk. From behind them, the sound of heavy doors opening filled the chamber. A new set of footsteps entered. Not the synchronized march of soldiers, but something slower, heavier. The Emperor stepped through, flanked by 6 of his own elite guards. His molten gold eyes swept over the bodies, then landed on Veal. I was told the trial of shadows was proceeding as tradition demands, the Emperor said, his voice low but carrying. This is not tradition. Vel bowed his head slightly. Majesty, the humans are dangerous. I sought only to ensure the trial was worthy of them. You sought to kill them before I could make my own judgment. The Emperor cut in. You turned my trial into your execution pit. Veal's jaw tightened, but he didn't denyet. The Emperor stepped closer to the platform. You forget your place, Lord Vale. You serve at my will, not your own ambition. His gaze slid to Mark and Dalton. And you forget what the gauntlet has already shown. These humans will not break as easily as you think, Dalton muttered under his breath. I'm starting to like the guy. Mark didn't answer. He knew better than to assume the Emperor's favor meant safety. The Emperor turned to them. You have survived the gauntlet. You have survived at the trial of shadows, even twisted as it was. You have killed beasts bred for warren soldiers trained to end wars. That is useful. Mark's voice was steady. You planning to use us then? The Emperor's eyes gleamed faintly. In the Dominion, everything of value is used. Vile's voice cut in sharply. Majesty, they are still intruders. Enough, the Emperor said without looking at him. They will be given quarters in the upper decks and access to the Dominion's armory, and they will serve me until I decide otherwise. Dalton blinked. Serve you how? The Emperor's molten gaze lingered on him for a moment before answering. There is a war brewing at the Dominion's borders. You will go where I send you. Fight who I tell you to fight, and in return, you will live. Mark studied him. And if we say no, the Emperor's smile was thin. Then Yao will die slowly. The walk back to the upper decks was skeet, save for the soft hum of the lifts and the occasional creak of the station's superstructure. New quarters were far from the storage deck they'd been dumped in before. Private rooms, clean air, even Asmal viewport looking out into the stars. Dalton dropped into one of the chairs. So, we're MCS now for an alien Emperor. Mark stood by the viewport, watching the slow drift of ships outside. We're survivors right now. That means working for him. Dalton frowned. And later, Mark's eyes stayed on the stars. Later, we figure out who's really in charge in this empire. And if it's not him, or if it shouldn't be him, we deal with that when we get there. Dalton gave a short, humorless laugh. Guess we've seen worse. Mark finally turned from the viewport, the faintest edge of a smile on his face. Yeah, we have. The summons came at the break of the station's artificial dawn cycle. The lights in the quarters brightened slowly, simulating sunrise. Though Mark could feel in his bones, it was all theater. Metal walls didn't care about dawn. The door hissed open without a knock. A tall figure in black armor stepped inside, carrying a tablet-like device. His face was hidden behind a smooth mask with only a vertical slit for the eyes. "Orders," he said in a voice that sounded half human, half processed through machinery. "You depart within the hour." Dalton was still half asleep, sitting up on the bunk. "Depart where?" The figure held out the device. "The Emperor's words are recorded. Yao will view them privately. Your escort will meet you at docking arm 17. He turned and left without another word. The recording activated with a simple touch. The Emperor's molten gold eyes filled the screen. "Humans," his voice began low and deliberate. "The Dominion has a frontier world named Caird Prime. It is a strip of stone and dust with little value except that it sits on the crossing point of 3 warp routes. Whoever controls Caird controls the border. My enemies know this. They have taken a mining colony there as a foothold. You will take it back for me." Mark exchanged a glance with Dalton. "You will have a ship," the Emperor continued, "and a small strike team from my guard. But make no mistake, this is not a mission for them. They will follow you or they will die. The enemy is not a beast but a rival faction. They call themselves the Yulari. They will not expect you. Use that." The recording ended with the faintest curve of his lips. They didn't waste time packing. There wasn't much to pack. The escort turned out to be 4 Dominion soldiers in dark gray armor, faces hidden behind insecty helmets. Each carried a rifle-like weapon that looked more suited for vaporizing walls than shooting people. Their transport was a sleek, narrow craft, docked in the shadow of the fortress's bulk. The hull was painted in a deep matte black that seemed to swallow the station's light. Dalton whistled. "That's a stealth ship, if I've ever seen one." One of the Dominion soldiers turned his head slightly. "It is not stealth. It is death that does not announce itself." "Cute slogan," Dalton muttered. The jump to Caird Prime was short. The ship's viewport went from the swirl of hyperspace to a barren expanse of rock and sand. In the distance, jagged mountains rose like the spines of a buried beast. The mining colony sat in the shadow of one of those ridges. From orbit, Mark could see the grid of structures, prefab shelters, processing plants, and the tall skeletal towers of drilling rigs. Smoke drifted from several points in Thecoloni, but no Dominion flags flew. The pilot's voice came through the enemy patrols detected on the north and west perimeters. "Recommend entry through the south ridge." Mark nodded. "Take us down low and slow. I want us under their sensors before we get close." Dalton strapped in beside him. "You got a plan for once we're down there?" "Yeah," Mark said. "Make them think we're not worth shooting at, then make them regret it." They sat down in a rocky gulch less than a kilometer from the colony's southern edge. The air was thin but breathable, carrying the sharp tang of ozone from the drilling equipment. The Dominion soldiers moved with crisp precision, but Mark could see it in their posture. They weren't used to taking orders from outsiders. That was fine. He didn't need them to like it, just to follow it. "Rule 1, Mark said quietly as they moved toward the colony. "We move fast, we hit harder, and we don't get cute with drawn-out firefights. In and out, before they can call in reinforcements." Dalton added, "Rule 2. If something moves and it's not us, assume it's hostile until it proves otherwise." They reached the colony's outer fence, a crude barrier of electrified mesh and metal poles. It had been patched in places with whatever scrap the Yulari had on hand. Mark crouched low, studying the 2 guards at the nearest gate. Their armor was light, their weapons older models, and their body language screamed boredom. "Twoman patrol," Dalton murmured. "We could take them before they know what hit them." "Not yet," Mark said. "We're ghosts until we're not." They circled wide, finding a spot where the fence sagged and the power lines had been cut. Slipping through was easy. Inside the colony, the streets between the prefab structures were eerily quiet. A few civilians, miners by the look of them, moved quickly from building to building, heads down. No one met their eyes. The first Ulari patrol came around a corner without warning. 4 soldiers in mismatched armor carrying rifles slung over their shoulders. Mark didn't fez it. He closed the distance in a dead sprint, slamming his blade into the throat of the lead soldier before the man even registered movement. Dalton dropped the second with a sharp twist of his neck, the crack echoing off the prefab walls. The Dominion soldier shandled the last 2 with CLS, but an open band low-power signal. Mark had it patched through. The screen flickered, and the face that appeared was not Dominion, not human. The alien skin was the deep green of tarnished copper, its eyes narrow and dark. Its voice was low, measured, almost amused. "Humans, you fought well on Caird, better than the Emperor's other pets." Dalton's tone was ice. "You with the Ultari?" "I am their commander," the alien said without hesitation. "And I know the Emperor sent you there to die. I also know you are not his loyal dogs." Mark didn't move, didn't blink. "What do you want?" The alien smiled faintly. "To make you an offer. The Dominion thinks humans are just another tool. I think you are a weapon. Work with me, and you will not be disposable pawns. You will be allies." Dalton glanced at Mark. "He's offering you a job." Mark kept his eyes on the screen. "And the catch? You kill for the Dominion, you get nothing but survival. Kill for me, and I will give you something the Emperor never will. Freedom." The transmission cut before Mark could answer. Back on the ramp, Dalton crossed his arms. "So what now?" "Take the offer." Mark stared out at the horizon of the dead moon. "We take the intel. The Ulari think we're good enough to recruit. The Emperor thinks we're good enough to send into a meat grinder. That means we're worth more than either side's willing to admit." Dalton grinned faintly, "Which means we play both until one makes the mistake of trusting us." Mark's mouth twitched in something close to a smile. "Exactly." When they finally jumped back toward Dominion space, the path was clear. The Emperor's fortress loomed ahead, its spires catching the light of the nearby sun. Mark knew the questions would start the moment they docked. He also knew the answers he'd give would be carefully chosen. Just enough truth to keep the Emperor's interest, and just enough omission to keep the Ulari's offer live. For the first time since stepping into this galaxy, they weren't just reacting. They had options, and that made them dangerous. Docking back at the Emperor's fortress felt like walking into the lion's mouth. The docking arm sealed with a hiss, and before the ramp had even lowered, a full squad of the Emperor's elite guards stood waiting. Their armor gleamed black, accented with thin red lines that pulsed faintly like veins. The insecti helmets turned in perfect unison to follow Mark and Dalton as they stepped down. No one spoke. The guards formed up around them and led the way through the fortress's cold, echoing corridors. Dalton leaned just close enough for Mark to hear. "We're either getting medals or spaced." Mark didn't answer. He could feel the tension in the air, the kind that came for a trigger was pulled. They were brought to the throne room directly, bypassing the waiting chambers. The massive black doors swung open, and the Emperor was already standing at the foot of his throne, his molten gold ice fixed on them. "You return later than expected." Mark's tone was even. "Ran into resistance." "I am aware." The Emperor's gaze sharpened like a predator catching the scent of blood. Fleet-sized resistance in an asteroid field that was not on your assigned route." Dalton opened his mouth, but Mark cut him off with a half-truth. "The Ulari pulled us out of jump ambush. We punched through, used the belt for cover." The Emperor's fingers tapped once on his metal armrest. "And yet you survived." Mark let a faint edge into his voice. "You sent us out there with a handful of guards and a gunship that wasn't built for fleet work. Surviving wasn't the surprise." The Emperor's gaze lingered on him for a moment too long. Then he spoke. "Caird Prime remains under Dominion control. For now, that is acceptable. You will rest. Your next orders will come soon." They were dismissed without ceremony, which told Mark more than words could. Their new quarters were higher in the fortress, still small, but with a view of the void. Dalton shut the door behind them and exhaled. He knows something's off. Mark dropped into the chair by the viewport. Doesn't matter if he knows. Matters if he can prove it. Dalton frowned. You think the Yulari commander is going to contact us again? He will, Mark said. And when he does, we listen. Doesn't mean we do what he wants, but we make sure we're not just pawns in the Emperor's game. 3 days later, the Emperor's orders came. A Dominion courier brought a sealed case and a data pad. The case contained updated weapons, a pair of compact, high-output energy rifles and combat knives with allied edges that shimmered faintly in light. The datapad held the mission brief. Infiltration and sabotage of Arale Station, deep in Yulari space. The station's function was clear. It handled encrypted communications between Yulari fleets. Destroy it and their coordination would take a hit. Dalton looked up from the datapad. Sounds straightforward. Mark scanned the specs. Straightforward missions are the ones that get you killed. If I were them, I'd have that station rigged to trap anyone who tries to take it. Dalton smirked. Guess we'll find out. They left the fortress on a courier frigate, faster and sleeker than their last ride with no guards this time. Just them, 2 pilots, and the mission. The jump into Yulari space was smooth, but Mark's gut was already telling him they weren't alone. He spent the entire trip watching the sensors, noting the faint blips that came and went too regularly to be natural. Halfway to the relay station, the comm panel lit up, not with a Dominion code, but an open band signal. Mark answered without hesitation. The Ulvari commander's green tarnished copper face appeared, the faintest smile on his lips. I knew you would come, he said. And it knew it would be for something important. Dalton crossed his arms. You tracking us now? The Yulari ignored him. Eyes on Mark. That station you're going to destroy. It's not just communications. It's where we keep the evidence that the Dominion has been violating the old treaties. Evidence that could turn half their allies into enemies overnight. Mark didn't flinch. You want us to steal it instead of blowing it up? Exactly. The Yulari commander said. Get me the files and I will make sure you are no longer disposable to anyone. Dalton gave a humorless laugh. And if we just blow it like we were told, then the Dominion's lies remain hidden, and you remain tools. The signal cut without waiting for an answer. Dalton turned to Mark. We can't play both sides forever. Eventually, one's going to figure out we're lying to them. Mark looked out the viewport at the streak of stars. That's the point. We make sure they both think we're more useful alive than dead, even if they know we're lying. Dalton shook his head. You're going to get us killed. Mark's voice was calm. Maybe, but not today. The relay station hung in space like Aspen's sea creature. Its long antenna arrays stretching out in every direction. It rotated slowly, the metallic surface catching faint glints from a nearby star. The frigate's stealth systems got them close enough to dock on an unmonitored maintenance port. Inside, the station's corridors were narrow with panels that hummed faintly from the power running through them. Althera technicians moved about, none armed, though the occasional guard in light armor patrolled the halls. Mark led Thiwe to the data core, bypassing the main access points and instead following the maintenance ducts. Dalton grunted as he crawled through the cramped space. You sure this leads to the core? I'm sure this leads somewhere the guards won't expect us, Mark replied. The data core was a cylindrical chamber. 3 decks high, filled with glowing columns of vertical storage units. A single Ulvari officer worked at the main terminal. Mark signaled to Dalton. One quick strike and the officer went down without a sound. Dalton moved to the terminal. I can get the files, but I need time. Mark took up a position by the door. You've got 5 minutes. The Dominion inserters had been clear. Overload the core. Detonate the station. The Yulari inserters were equally clear. Extract the files. Doing both would require precision. Dalton's fingers flew over the terminal's alien interface. Got the evidence. Dominion ship manifests in restricted zones. Intel logs from before the treaty expired. Enough to make the Emperor's head spin. Mark planted a charge on the far side of the core. Now wipe the rest. Dalton triggered a purge program. The glowing columns began dimming one by one as the data burned out. The first alarm sounded just as they left the core. All the regards rounded the corner ahead. Rifles up. Mark dropped the first with a burst from his energy rifle. Dalton taking the second before he could fire. They moved fast, ducking into maintenance shafts when the main corridors got too hot. The station's rotation disoriented most people, but Mark navigated without hesitation, cutting through angles that brought them back to the docking port ahead of the Ulari's response teams. By the time they launched, the first secondary explosions were blooming behind them, the core charges doing their work. Dalton exhaled hard in the cockpit. So now we've got Dominion thinking we blew the place like good little soldiers, and Ulari thinking we handed them their golden ticket. Mark sat back exactly where I want us. The Emperor was waiting when they returned. Not in the throne room, but in a private war council chamber. Maps off contested space floated as holograms in the air, dotted with Dominion and Ulara fleet positions. He studied them as he spoke. The relay station is gone. You have it done well. Mark inclined his head slightly. We keep our end of the deal. The Emperor's eyes flicked to him. And yet, I sense you have kept something for yourself. Dalton tensed, but Mark didn't blink. I keep breathing. That's what I keep. The Emperor smiled faintly. A predator amused by prey that bares its teeth. Good. You will need that skill. The next mission will be delicate. In the days that followed, Mark and Dalton began building